Hello, everybody. Welcome to another R-rated review. This is our first in a little while, I think about a month or so. We're here for the first episode of Loki, the new show on Disney Plus in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the third to follow WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I'm going to apologize right up front. It is 90 degrees in here today. My PC rebooted on me overnight, and among the things that it did when it rebooted and updated was it added a little temperature thing. I assume it's just connecting to weather.com, but it's like 88 degrees, heat advisory. So I'm going to be very sweaty by the end of this, and I had to turn off my fans for the sake of the sound quality. So this is going to be a real good day. I may literally take breaks just to de-sweatify myself. But we're looking at the first episode of the season of Loki, titled Glorious Purpose, which is a really good title. We're actually going to... I'm kind of trying to structure these reviews a little differently. For WandaVision and for The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I did sort of a... kind of a beat-by-beat walkthrough of the episode and then had my thoughts near the end, and that doesn't really make for a great review, in my opinion. I think that's kind of just literally me telling you what the episode is and then having just some stuff at the end. So instead, I'm going to try to break it down into some kind of chunks, different things I like to discuss, and the first one of those is kind of getting into the core thesis of the show. I'm going to stay away from spoilers for right now. I'll warn you guys when spoilers come in. Not going beat by beat means it's a lot easier for me to compartmentalize that too. But it seems like the idea that we're getting at with this show, aside from the fact that it's a great excuse for like some time travel, timeline hopping weirdness, it's also a chance for us to explore Loki as a character. If anything, this series itself sort of feels like a response to the existence and the prevalence, I guess, of the fandom associated with Loki over the last about decade. I think 11 years now was when Thor came out. Actually, that might have been 2011 now that I'm thinking about it. So yeah, about a decade now. And the thesis we're kind of getting at with at least this episode, probably the whole show, it does kind of set it up that this is going to be kind of the core, focus here, is Loki evil? Is he irredeemably evil? And does he want to be good? Does he care about good or evil? And does he have a preference, or is he just kind of ambitiously minded and that's all that there really is to him? And maybe that question's a little bit self-responding, I guess. I don't mean to frame it in such like a one-directional kind of way. There's also him sort of exploring like what his purpose in life is. The episode title obviously plays into this, Glorious Purpose, which is one of his more quotable lines from his second appearance, the Avengers. I don't remember the entire line. I think it's just sort of like, I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with a glorious purpose. And the idea behind that line in the Avengers is that he's there to subjugate Earth, essentially. Whether it's the idea being that he would get to essentially, wow, I am really already very sweaty, that he would get to keep Earth, essentially, once he's done what he needs to for Thanos, which is to collect the Tesseract, allow the Chitauri to overwhelm the Earth, and then Loki gets to rule whatever's left. Now, it's interesting. There's kind of a bit of a... So one of the complicated things that needs to be tackled by the show pretty quickly is we have had a decade of Loki. He showed up in Thor, then the Avengers, then in Thor the Dark World, Thor Ragnarok, and then finally in Avengers Infinity War, where, I mean... Spoilers for... I feel like the entirety of the Infinity Saga is now safe as far as spoilers go. He is killed in Avengers Infinity War. Thanos breaks his neck. It's actually one of the more brutal deaths in the entire series in terms of... It's among the more graphic ones in the sense that you kind of watch it go down pretty closely. But so from Avengers, which is probably his... real lowest point as a character, not in terms of like, clever writing or anything like that, but like he is not only villainous, but he's working for a bigger, badder guy, and he's kind of a pawn in Thanos' game. So Avengers is kind of his lowest point, and from that point forward, he does make a very slow, deliberately paced trod in the direction of like at least some level of redemption. He doesn't really go out of his way to try to, but he does seem to be really heartbroken that him and Thor aren't on great terms. He feels distanced from Odin. Obviously, in Thor: The Dark World, Frigga dies, and that's a big problem for him too because he was very close with Frigga. But so he does all of these things, and he does eventually like make one final attempt to redeem himself by attempting to kill Thanos. And failing. Thanos uses the power of, I think, the Tesseract to freeze him in place, and then he ultimately kills him. So the Loki that we have here isn't that Loki. So in the events of Avengers Endgame, the Avengers go back in time, specifically Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, Scott Lang, and Bruce Banner go back to 2012 New York to capture the Space Stone, a.k.a. the Tesseract, the Time Stone. Did they go back for 3? I think they went back for... Oh, and then they were going back for the Scepter also, which had the Mind Stone in it, which Steve managed to get. They got the Time Stone. Bruce Banner got that from the Ancient... The Ancient one? Oh my god, what is their name? I don't know why. Like, they don't have like a namey name. But the previous Sorcerer Supreme before Doctor Strange. But so they mess up. They get attacked by... Well, so Tony is able to, with the help of Scott, cause a distraction that allows Tony from 2023 to walk away with the Space Stone or the Tesseract. The Hulk barges out. They drop the case, and Loki grabs it and disappears. And in the context of Avengers Endgame, they're like, oh shit, we lost the Tesseract. Now what do? We have to go back in time further to get it, which they do, and they save the day. This follows from that Loki. We actually get to see the beginning of... We actually get to see that moment from Endgame as kind of the launching off point for this. So this is Loki at his absolute worst, and we get to kind of see him sort of grappling with the idea of who he even is, what he even wants out of his life. There's an implication in the episode that he had planned to betray Thanos all along. So, which is interesting. It does also kind of conclusively say, so there was kind of a theory that I subscribe to at least a bit. If you look closely at Loki during the Avengers, any close-ups on his eyes, he looks like he hasn't slept. He looks like he's a real mess. And his eyes are a little bit more like crystal blue. Like, he has bluish eyes anyway, but they were much brighter in a similar way, not the same way, but a very similar way to the eyes of people who were being controlled by the Scepter. So I had, there was a theory that a lot of people had that I kind of liked just as a thematic thing, that Loki was also, at least to some degree, under the control of the Mind Stone. It's kind of neat. Didn't really go anywhere. In here, it's kind of made clear that that was not the case, that Loki was acting of his own free will, even though he was acting under the weight of Thanos. There's a quote that Loki actually delivers in this episode that he's kind of accusing everyone of being dumb. And that's kind of the goal of his ambition, is that like he would be a good leader. He knows how to lead. He says there's a fork in every road and the wrong path always taken. Basically saying that like people are dumb and they choose the wrong thing, and that it kind of follows from his ideology in Avengers, which is that freedom is the big lie. That when you're allowed to choose for yourself, you're going to make the wrong choice, and that having a strong and wise king is the only way to truly be safe and secure and all of that. And it's kind of interesting. He throws a lot of projection out there that kind of comes back to him at various points. He actually gets accused at one point. Something I found kind of interesting. This, I think, might be in there as a reference, along with being kind of a pointed commentary, that for being someone who sees himself as a just and valiant king, he does have a tendency to lose a lot. Like, he lost kind of back-to-back very quickly, and he's accused of that just kind of being in his nature, quote unquote, which is interesting because it is kind of a an interesting read on the character of Loki, but also I don't know specifically where, but that's an accusation that's actually levied at Thanos in the comics. I don't remember which one. There's a few comics that focus on Thanos and his character, and one of them kind of gets into the nature of Thanos and the fact that if he had a completed Infinity Gauntlet, which he does at, I think, at least once, if not, a few more times in the comics, if he really wanted, he could just win at that point. There's nothing that stops him from just winning, but he still loses. And so the rationalizing of that is basically that the only way that Thanos, with a full Infinity Gauntlet in the comics, not so much in the movies, but in the comics, the only way that he could lose, despite having infinite cosmic power, is if he kind of just wants to lose for some reason, whether it's internalized or whether he feels like he needs to for some reason. And it's just kind of an interesting, I thought that was a neat kind of reference. I don't know if it is an actual reference. It felt like a reference, but I thought that was kind of neat. Loki is visibly very uncomfortable when he's confronted with the horrors that he brought upon New York. You got to see a bit of that in the Avengers. Thor even kind of, points it out to him as like, this is not a kingdom. This is not, ruling. This is destruction and chaos and madness. And there's a point in the episode where he is actually shown, again, the horrors that he inflicts on New York. And he kind of is, he kind of deflects a lot and sort of doesn't want to acknowledge that, like, yeah, he brought carnage to Earth and at no point seemed to be inflicting any real order on them. And he does start to recognize that he, like, his own failings and his own kind of smallness in a way. He sort of winds up arguing in the end. So he argues earlier that, like, the situation that he's in, which we're going to get to in a second, but the situation that he's in is all some kind of trick or illusion. That the idea being that, like, an illusion is something that a weak person does to instill fear in someone else, to appear powerful and strong. And he starts to kind of come to the, acceptance that maybe that's also kind of what he is doing, like what he's done through his life as he uses this mischief and these tricks and all these illusions and things to, be stronger or seem stronger than he actually is. So I think that's kind of, we've got this, like, exploration on Loki's character and the nature of his life and the nature of his existence as the trickster god. And, like, what does that mean exactly? So that's kind of, that seems to be kind of the thesis of this episode. And I think it's going to wind up being kind of the main core of this season overall. I believe there are 6 episodes that are coming for this, that are coming for this season. So things are going to be moving kind of quickly. This was a 50-ish minute episode. I think it's probably more like 40, 45 minus, end credits and all of that. But so kind of an interesting exploration on Loki. As far as the episode itself goes, there's not a lot to spoil. I'm going to talk about what's going on in the episode a little freely this time. There's not a lot to spoil because it is the first episode and we're dealing with some really new concepts. It's a little different from, like, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You kind of had the first episode be, okay, where are these characters now? And the very basics of setting up that there would be a new plot for this. In WandaVision, you're already really ingrained. Like, you start kind of in the middle of it, and you're like, okay, the mystery of the season is kind of like the whole idea. So there's not, so that one, you're kind of already in it. This time around, it's not, it's a little, it's kind of halfway in between, because I don't think anybody's really lost on who Loki is, so there wasn't a ton of explanation really needed of who he is or what he's been up to, because we saw the last thing he was up to. It literally is seconds before the start of this show. So instead, this episode really focuses on world building, and it really focuses on callbacks. Oh boy, the camera is struggling with the heat a little bit too, so we're going to do the best we can with this, but we'll see how it goes. Haha. The premise of this show is basically that Loki is what the show terms a variant, essentially an aberration in time. The idea being that the timeline, so there's a concept that's introduced called the sacred timeline. The idea is that there are these three beings called timekeepers, and they oversee time. There is an intended timeline, and anything that deviates from the timeline is bad and needs to be reset. So just that on its own. They also introduced kind of in the background that there was some kind of multiversal war in the past. I'm curious how this will play into other things that are going on in the MCU, but what is interesting to me is there were, over the course of Avengers Endgame, there were a handful of very, very tiny deviations in time and a couple less tiny deviations in time, and I'll talk about those in a sec. But, for example, Hawkeye goes back in time to before the snap, and he brings back a baseball glove. That's not a significant deviation in time, but it's a deviation in time, and it's something that could be cleaned up. And so, essentially, the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, exists to correct wobbles in time. A small enough one like the baseball glove may not even warrant their attention at all, but something like, let's see, one example I guess I could give is 2014 in Endgame. They go and knock out Peter Quill, and they then steal the Power Stone, and then they put it back. But if you remember, in Guardians of the Galaxy, Peter Quill was like maybe a minute ahead of Ronan's men. I can't remember his name. Karoth? No. I forgot his name. Damn. The who? That guy. I was going to say the actor's name, and I forgot his too. And it sucks because he's like been making a lot of waves lately and has been in a bunch more stuff. Shit. Nope. I forgot it. Damn it. But so that would be an example where, so these people would show up. They kind of have this like glass door like portal that they step through. They have I think it's called a reset charge, and it's basically just a little a little bloop that they stick in the ground. It fills with like a purple gas. We don't actually get to see what it does exactly, but the implication is that it undoes whatever deviated from from the sacred timeline. So that's kind of interesting. And the idea is that Loki is a rather serious one. And normally what happens is they will try variants. Like they literally have like a court system. It sounds like they just kind of reset everybody. And reset, it's unclear whether that's like killing them or sending them back to where they're supposed to be or something. But there's something that's kind of going on with that. We don't see a lot of it yet. I think we're going to see more of that in the future. Variants create the variants, and any variance. Those words are very close together. Create what are called a nexus event, which I think is just now the MCU's term for splits in the timeline. And it's interesting because if you think about it, 2012 is not the only nexus event that would be like a major one in the MCU. So that's probably the biggest one. Outside of 2014, what I was just talking about with Morag and Vormir and all of that stuff. So 2014 is shaping up to be the same as most of the other time-hopping stuff from Endgame, except at the end, Thanos, Gamora, and Nebula jump forward in time and then get dusted. So we have a second Nexus event where Thanos is just gone. And the Guardians of the Galaxy, the events of Guardians 1 might still happen a little bit, but there's no Gamora, there's no Nebula, and Ronan no longer has Thanos to answer to. So it's hard to say. They could lose based on that because at that point Ronan has a much easier time getting a hold of the Power Stone and taking it for himself. So maybe Xandar gets screwed and all of that goes a different direction. But Thanos not being around would also mean that Loki would live in that timeline too. Because in 2014, that's after Thor: The Dark World, Thor goes back to Earth. Loki has taken over Asgard, pretending to be Odin, who he leaves in a retirement home. It takes place before the events of Age of Ultron, but Loki doesn't have anything to do with that. Frigga would still be dead. Odin would be alive, though not for much longer. So, yeah, there's a second Nexus event, and I'm curious if this show is going to explore that at all. But so the Timekeepers are the creators of the Time Variance Authority, and that's kind of our like home base for this show. They're sort of time cops. That's basically what they are. They're time cops. And the idea is that these guys kind of go in, they explore variants, they reset, they keep the timeline in place. And we actually have a moment where Loki is sort of shown, or he's shown a bunch of elements from his past. We also see a couple interesting callbacks. One of the first things that happens is Loki goes through a portal and lands in a desert in Mongolia. And the way that he lands and the position that he's in and his kind of like reaction to that is actually it feels like a big callback to Tony Stark crashing down in the desert in Iron Man 1. I thought that was kind of a neat bit there, especially since making the rounds on Reddit recently was Tom Hiddleston being interviewed at some point. I don't know when the interview happened, but he said that he had been, I think it was around the time the Avengers came out. He was saying that like he went to see Iron Man 1 in theaters and saw the beginnings of the MCU kind of starting to form, and he was like, wow, that'd be incredible to be involved in something like this. And then he's like, so I used to think that, and now here I am shooting, filming shots of me like lifting Tony Stark by the neck and throwing him out a window. So like, and now he's got his own show where he even gets a visual callback to Tony crashing down in the desert. So I thought that was kind of neat. There's a weird matter dematerializer that's very early into the episode, and it reminded me a lot of the big barber machine that Stan Lee uses in Thor Ragnarok, which I thought was kind of a nice connection between Thor and Loki in that. Loki is apparently actually aware of the fact that the Avengers time traveled. I think that's kind of interesting. The explanation why it was essentially that you could never mistake two different Tony Stark clones being in the same room, which is kind of interesting. And it's also proof that Loki, even when he gets one-upped in like cleverness situations, it's a fun cut between shots there, right? Camera died again. That he's not stupid. Like, he is very shrewd and he's very aware of his surroundings and what's going on. So I think that's kind of a nice way to remind people that even though he's about to get kind of stripped down pretty hard in terms of how powerful he actually is over the course of the episode, that he's not an idiot. Like, he's not just completely phony. He does know what he's talking about. But that's interesting, though, that Loki's aware that the Avengers time traveled. And it's interesting because he assumes that they had to time travel to prevent him from winning. So even there, the ego is pretty strong. Like, he's not aware of the fact that, like, he always lost New York. They didn't need to time travel to do that. They were there for something else entirely. I thought that was kind of an interesting bit there. Let's see. I think I'll save that for a minute. So some technical thoughts, I guess I can jump to. The green screen in Mongolia is really bad and obvious. It's not like anyone's got like a green halo effect or anything, but like there's some kind of like lighting and depth issue going on where it's very obvious that they're doing a green screen soundstage, which, like, fine, shooting in the desert is bad in general, but it just kind of stuck out really hard. It does improve later. There are shots that are taken in wide settings later that are way less, at the very least, way less obvious. And like, I'll take that over like legitimate on location shooting. But part of that may have been that those were the shots that were taken in the, at the height of the pandemic. So safety precautions were kind of making it difficult. But it did look a little rough. I think they could have done another pass on that to try to make it all, come together. Weirdly enough, Loki, so kind of and this might be again connected to how this was shot in the first place, but Loki has none basically of his scars. So at the end of Avengers, his face is like beat the fuck up. In Avengers Endgame, when we see the scene again, even when he turns into Captain America to make fun of him, which is itself a callback to Thor: The Dark World, even Steve Rogers has the face scars and stuff. So there's only so much he can do about those scars, and yet immediately after he lands in the desert, you don't see the scars, and then they're gone for the rest of the episode and probably for the rest of the show. It was just one of those continuity things that was kind of like, come on, you could have done that, and then been like, hey, we can fix those. They have a thing called a time twister. So he's got a neck. It's like an ankle bracelet, but it's around his neck. A necklace, I guess. I don't know if there's a real name for those. Like a neck manacle. I don't know. But it's controllable through a thing called a time twister. The idea is it's like, think of like the old Gen 1 iPods that you had the little circle wheel. Like it's got a little circle wheel and it can kind of teleport you forward or backward into time, but not time. It just kind of resets physically where you are based on your timeline. Like they could have done something where it's like, hey, give me a second, just sit still for about an hour. What? And then whoop forward and like, oh, hey, my face is fixed or something. But they didn't really do that. They introduce a mascot for the TVA called Miss Minutes, I think. Miss Minutes. Something feels off about the character. It's like an anthropomorphic clock woman. The only reason I say woman is because it's Miss Minutes and she's got the tropey eyelash kind of thing going on, but it's just a clock. It's like TT from Diddy Kong Racing, except even more basic of a clock. But what's interesting is, so they do a sequence where it's like an animated little info, packet, very, very like 70s. The whole aesthetic of this show, at least in the TVA, is very like 70s sci-fi. And everything's got this like 2D hand-drawn animated bit for that, except Ms. Minutes, who is designed to look like she fits in there, but she's actually three-dimensional, and it's like cel-shaded and outlined in a way where she fits mostly, but she does stand out a little bit of being like actually three-dimensional, which is weird. I don't know if that was intentional or not. We'll have to see where the show goes with that. Like I said, the overall tone is very like aggressive 70s sci-fi. When I say aggressive, I mean like, so not the best sci-fi example, but if you've ever seen A Clockwork Orange, there's the long shot with the Kubrick stare at the milk bar, the incredibly long zoom out. Think of the soundtrack with that, like the really heavy, deep synth tones. Like those kinds of notes. That's a really heavy, at least in the intro and the end credits, there's a lot of that. And there's definitely a bit of that throughout the soundtrack too. The visual aesthetics are very orange. They're very, not a lot of, I guess there was some, I'm trying to remember if there was like a wood grain thing going on. I guess there was in some spots, but a lot of like amber tones, oranges, yellows, and browns. Very much the 70s aesthetic. And it's just got like this very Twilight Zone-y kind of feel to it, and it's interesting. I'm curious how that's like. It's definitely working hard at the idea of something is not right here, something is off, and I thought that was kind of cool. The whole there's an entire bureaucracy sequence. Did I say bureaucracy? Weird. It felt like I said it weird. But there's a whole sequence of him getting kind of filed and put into the system. It's got a very, if you've never seen Brazil, it feels a lot like that. If you're not familiar with Brazil, that's the movie that WALL-E got its main theme from. The bump bump bum bump 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 dun 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 dun, copyright claims. But yeah, Brazil is actually a pretty interesting movie. I'm forgetting everything today. I'm trying to remember who made Brazil. Terry Gilliam, I think. Terry Gilliam with I'm not even gonna come close to remembering the actor's name. He was in the Don Quixote movie recently. But I liked it. I thought it was fine. It wasn't like one of my favorites, but I liked it. I'm glad I watched it, and I recommend you do too. But the bureaucracy sequence feels very much like that. Like it's or like Orwellian bureaucracy in the sense of like everything is paperwork and everything is written down in triplicate and very, very heavily managed and stuff. As for like little things here and there, before we get into any spoilers, Eugene Cordero, who plays Pillboy in The Good Place, has a role here as Casey the clerk. He was fun, really funny little comedy bits there. He doesn't know what a fish is because he's lived his entire life in the TVA. There's a metal detector looking thing that apparently measures your temporal aura, I guess. But the guy that's there asks him, like, you know, are you a robot? Essentially asks him, like, are you a robot, or have you had any cybernetic implants? Do you have a metal exoskeleton? And Loki's like, no. What would happen if I do? And he's like, oh, you'd be fried from the inside out. And he's about to step in, and he asks, like, the phrasing. Oh, it starts with like, to your knowledge. And Loki's like, to your knowledge. Wait, do a lot of people not know they're robots? Like, I thought that was just kind of a cute little bit there. That was just kind of like, because the MCU does have life model decoys, and I don't know how. I say the MCU has it. They name dropped it once in the Avengers, actually, and it was a thing in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which I think this show is finally formalizing that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is outside the canon these days, and I'll get into that in a few. But the life model decoys, I don't know if they're strictly robots or something else. I don't know how that exactly works, but it was just kind of a cute little thing there. The slogan for the TVA is "For all time, always," which is a little fashy, which I guess makes sense for an organization that exists to keep the timeline in order. But it was just kind of a. It's not hard to come up with a slightly authoritarian slogan for an organization like that. Loki's got a little bio sheet, and like just for like his record or whatever, and his sex is listed as fluid, which is interesting. I don't remember if he ever. I'm trying to remember if he ever appeared as a woman in the movies, and I don't remember if he did. He may have briefly in Thor: The Dark World, but I don't remember. But either way, that was cool to see. And it's kind of fitting for Loki as someone who just kind of like, well, here's me, but I'm going to transform into whatever the hell I want. They have this fun little meta-contextual play on the effectiveness of standing up and grandstanding when you're trying to make a point. He goes to do it, and he gets time-twisted back to sitting in his seat. And he's like, no, I was just standing. I wasn't trying to leave. I was just standing because I wanted to say a thing. And the person he's sitting opposite, who is Agent Mobius, played by Owen Wilson, is like, oh, go for it. And he's like, well, now it doesn't really matter. I kind of lost the thing. And he's like, no, go for it. Just stand and do your thing. And then and it's just kind of like, it plays into that whole theme of like, is he just a weak person who's trying to appear strong? And this is one of those tricks to make him do it. Or, you know, Mobius himself seems to be a pretty good surrogate for the audience in terms of trying to understand Loki as a character, because he has fluctuated really strongly, especially based on who's writing him, between heartless villain, essentially, and, you know, silly trickster who really misses Thor and wants to have his family back and stuff. So, like, we're kind of exploring that, like, fluctuating characterization, and Mobius is really trying to understand that. So I think that's a good surrogate there. There's a film strip we see that sort of is a highlight of Loki's life that has ETH 616 written on the film strip, and I believe I'm trying to remember. I think 616 is the main Marvel universe. So the Marvel Comics universe, the Marvel Comics multiverse, the main prime universe that most of the stories take place in, I believe, is Earth 616. The MCU had some ridiculous number to it for a while, and I think they've changed it, but I believe 616 is the prime universe. So that was kind of neat. Tom Hiddleston is an executive producer on the show. I don't know if any of the other stars have been EPs for their own shows thus far. I'd noticed during the credits, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I think we're going to hop into spoilers now. So go to this time stamp to skip that to get to my final thoughts and predictions. one of those predictions. Actually, I'll keep the predictions in the spoilers. We'll hop to the very end and just talk like shop on just like final thoughts from there. As for spoilers, they will be beginning in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I thought it was great that Loki is DB Cooper. I thought that was fucking hilarious. What a silly little thing to just have Tom Hiddleston do. It was a very Doctor Who-ish sort of moment, having Loki at some point in his past in 1971 go and be DB Cooper because he lost a bet with Thor, and I thought that was just kind of hilarious. It is a meaningless little thing, but I thought it was fun. Let's see. Apparently, the Avengers time traveling was an intended part of the sacred timeline, which is interesting, and it does get out in front of the idea that, well, if time variances are bad, how come the Avengers aren't being arrested? And Loki even straight up says, like, you don't want me, then you want them. They're the ones who time traveled to do that thing. And they were like, oh, actually, that was supposed to happen. So they're all set, which is interesting because it means that the blip was supposed to happen and their solution to the blip was also supposed to happen. So that's kind of interesting. Loki escaping with the Tesseract was not supposed to happen, which maybe means more that the sacred timeline was like, yep, they're going to time travel, they're going to get the Infinity Stones. How they do it doesn't super matter because they're going to go back and fix it. But Loki getting the Tesseract messed that up. They didn't quite explain whether or not 2014 was also a Nexus event or not, and I'm going to get back to that one as well again. There's a desk full of Infinity Stones, which is fucking crazy. But the Infinity Stones are also powerless in the TVA, which seems to just be a pocket universe all to itself. It's very interesting to me. I like that Mobius actually asks him too, like, "Hey, did you try to use that yet?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, a bunch of times. It doesn't do anything here." Like, I thought that was just kind of a nice casual throw, but like, "Yep, I tried it, didn't work." Shit. So the Infinity Stones are junk here, which is very interesting. I like that Loki's still hanging on to it though, because obviously, it is the Tesseract from his timeline, and so he's kind of hanging on to it. It's sort of his little like artifact kind of thing. It's also interesting that there were a bunch of other time stones that were in there of varying colors. I know that there were time stones, there were power stones, there were soul stones, which was very surprising. I don't know if all 6 were in there, but at the very least I do distinctly remember green, orange, and purple all being in there. I'd have to go back and check to see if all of them are there, because that means that there were various variants in which all of these time stones eventually wound up at the TVA. The time stone makes the most sense, and I think there were mostly time stones, understandably so, but like the soul stone is a very weird one to show up there just because it was so mysterious to start with. But also, like, if the reality stone was there too, that's like, so the ether eventually, like, these are all the results of various time violations and things, and it would be really interesting to see how some of those things even happened in the first place. One of those power stones might even be from 2014, so who knows? The Time Twister playing around was kind of funny with the TVA Minuteman. I don't know if that agent is going to get a name by the end of this, but I was kind of worried at one point because he kind of left her in between phases, and then she appeared elsewhere, so it's like, oh god, did he just imprison her outside of time forever? But that was fine. We have our prospective villain, or at least we have a character that the TVA is after, a fugitive variant who is Loki. So the question is this Loki in his own future, and it's all winding into itself, in which case maybe the idea is that he's trying to burn down the TVA because the TVA is doing something itself, and so the TVA from earlier is after him, and now Loki is gonna be after himself and shit. Or my other thought, and this is one of my like interesting predictions here, it's probably the first one, that this is just Loki later in the season going back and fucking with stuff to try to do a different thing. But what if the fugitive variant, is also Loki, but the Loki from the 2014 altered timeline where Thanos doesn't exist anymore. I think that'd be kind of interesting if we have Loki from two different points. We have this Loki who comes from the Avengers and a different Loki that comes from after Thor the Dark World. I'd be very interested to see where that kind of goes. Also, they didn't say it out loud, but if you look on the screen, this is another really big one. The item, so there's an item that some Minutemen are exploring in 1858, I think, or something like that. Yeah, I think it's like 1858. They find a shovel in a field, and the name of the shovel, like it's referred to on the screen as a quantum ore shovel, which is interesting. But also, the manufacturer of the shovel is listed as Advanced Idea Mechanics. AIM, the company that Aldrich Killian runs in Iron Man 3. And it was described as early third millennium, so this could be Aldrich Killian pre-Iron Man 3, but post, initial interaction with Tony Stark. It could be AIM after Aldrich Killian. It did say that someone time traveled in order to come back, grab something, and then go back to the future again. So it could also be AIM trying to copy the Pym particles. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm curious how much that's going to come back. We have a moment where Mobius brings Loki to what's called the Time Theater, where they show him a film strip of the events of the Avengers. And I'm just sitting there going, all right, at some point they're going to fast forward to where his life is supposed to go, right? And they do briefly. They go to Thor the Dark World, which Marvel just cannot get enough of that fucking movie. But they show him... Mobius shows him the fact that like his own treachery results directly in the death of Frigga, which tears him up a lot. And then when he goes on a chase and all of this stuff, and he comes back and he looks and he watches her death, then he watches Odin's death, and then he watches his own death at the hands of Thanos. Like, he watches a lot of stuff going on there, and it's like a big deal. And I think that really would shake anybody. The idea of like, well, now that I've seen my death and I know where my life leads, what is my purpose? What am I here for? So that's kind of going to be an interesting thing to watch him grapple with. The fact that he has now kind of seen where his life leads if he goes back. So that's going to be like a whole thing. The Minutemen have their like batons that erase people, and they remind me a lot of the Grandmaster's melt stick from Thor Ragnarok. Another connection to Thor Ragnarok that's kind of neat. I'm curious if that's going to turn out to be related. Like if... Because so Sakaar exists in a weird time bubble itself. Time flows differently there, just like it does in the TVA. So one, maybe there's some connection to Sakaar and the Grandmaster and all this. Two, maybe his bodyguard person was a former TVA Minuteman who like wound up on Sakaar and just had their melt stick for it. So I don't know. There's some neat stuff that's kind of floating around there. Trying to see if there's other things that I've skipped here. But yeah, I think it's interesting. This whole episode is kind of like setting up Loki's internal motivation. Like, he doesn't really fully... It takes him till the end of the episode to kind of accept that, like, he, especially here, is, like, really powerless. He has nothing. And he just went from nearly conquering Earth to zero. Like, that's a hell of a whiplash. He accepts that the illusions and things are him trying to appear stronger than he really is. And I think that's going to be kind of a big deal. I loved the effect of him getting the shit kicked out of him at the beginning of it. Like, he gets hit and he gets slowed down to 1/16 of his speed, but he feels the pain in real time. Like, that's heavy shit. That was a great effect, though. That was a lot of fun. In the film strip, they actually show him killing... Well, they show the death of Phil Coulson, and it's never... correct, like they never suggest that Phil Coulson didn't die, or they never suggest that he was brought back to life, because that would be a great punch to Loki, being like, oh, he lived. Yeah, he comes back. It's fine. And I think this is them finally writing Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. out of the canon at this point, which there's the question of whether Agent Carter, the show, is also out of canon, though Edwin Jarvis shows up in Avengers Endgame, so who knows? Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. also has its own weird time travel stuff by the end, so like there's a lot of weird shit going on there at this point. But so that's a whole thing. I think that's probably... Oh, so as far as predictions, yeah. Either Loki is eventually going to figure something out about the TVA and is going to wind up bouncing through time to cause all this trouble that his past self or his present self is being recruited now to deal with, or 2014 Loki is going to wind up being the villain, and that's going to be a whole thing because 2014 is its own can of worms entirely. There's a huge difference in what 2014 is all about, and as far as we know, we're not going to see any of that. So it'd be really cool to see that. Or if there's there's a second season that's already been greenlit, maybe that's what that one's going to be all about. Also, predictions for the end of this season, because season 2 has been greenlit, is Variant Loki is going to survive because he kind of has to based on how this works for like a second season. But I'm betting he's going to kind of elect to stay out of the main timeline because he kind of knows where he ends up in the end. If he rejoins a timeline in the end, I'll be kind of surprised, but it's kind of neat that like Loki's sort of going to wind up. I feel like they're going to end up in this kind of buddy cop scenario between Mobius and Loki. So we'll see how that goes. Welcome back from the spoiler zone. I liked the first episode. First episodes are always kind of tough. Like there's a lot of setup. There's a lot you need to set down in motion. And I think that, oh boy, I forgot to actually pull up my other ratings because I usually try to compare. There we go. I usually try to compare these to each other when I'm kind of doing this here, but it did a good amount of setup. We have a good exploration into a very complex character. We are doing some world building things. It was a little bit, I would say that it was kind of hyper focused on just the time theater and like getting himself set up as a character, but that's kind of what you have to do for these first episodes anyway. I would say that it didn't like grab me as much as WandaVision episode 1 did, but I would say that this one got my attention more than the first episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier did. So I would have to put this in between those. I think if I was to give this a rating, which I'm going to, I would give this I'm stuck between a 6 and a 7. I would, you know what? I'll give it a 7. I think this is a pretty solid start. I think that there's some room to grow. There's some room to start stringing stuff together. There's some good concepts that are being introduced. We are now kind of establishing a basis for how time even works in the MCU, which is going to lead into some interesting questions with things like What If and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, possibly even Fantastic Four when that comes around in a handful of years. There's a lot that's kind of going on here that I'm intrigued to see where it's going to go. So yeah, I think I'm going to give it a 7. We have 6 episodes in total for this season. The next episode I think is going to be his first like outing to try to investigate the stuff that's going on, because they have a fugitive that they need to locate who appears to be bouncing around through time, causing chaos, and we haven't seen their face yet. So it'll be very curious to see where that's going. And I think the next episode is going to introduce us to Loki out in the field, but I don't think we're going to see our shady robed figure just yet. I think that's probably going to be like an episode 3 or 4 thing. I'm very curious to see if we get any cameos in the show. I'm not familiar with any off the top of my head. I haven't looked ahead to see if there are any in the casting news for this. I'm curious if this is also going to lead into Doctor Strange 2 the way WandaVision definitely is. It'd be very cool to see a movie with Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, and Loki all doing crazy magic shit together. So that could be fun. But yeah, so I think that's what I've got for this. I would love to hear what you guys think. If you haven't seen it yet, you can hop on Disney Plus. Loki is airing, I think, every Wednesday. They've been kind of unclear. It sounds like it's going to be every Wednesday instead of every Friday. But so the first episode, I was going to say Great Purpose. Oh my God. Glorious Purpose. Wow. It is really hot. The camera keeps dying because it's so hot. And my brain is apparently also doing the same. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you guys next time. I hope you kind of liked this format. I'm still feeling it out. I need to be a little less wandery with my thoughts, but I think breaking it down into pieces helps kind of, explore the individual factors at play here, and also helps keep the spoilers contained. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next week for the next episode. So yeah, see you later. Bye.